All right. Congestion, man. I don't think it's ever going to go away. The congestion's always going to be here. With that out of the way, good evening, everybody. I am glad you're here. Whether you're watching live or whether you're watching the replay, I'm glad you're with me. And as you come into the live tonight, drop into the comments where you're checking in from. Let me know. I like to know where people are watching from. And you can do the same thing in the replay here on Facebook or on my other social media platforms where this video will end up posted. Let me know where you're checking in from. And tonight, we are going to be talking about uncertainty and about the idea of how to experience safety in uncertainty. Why recovery feels so hard and what can actually help us when that uncertainty is present. And what I want to begin by saying is this. If recovery feels hard right now, because you don't know what's going to happen, that doesn't mean that you're failing. And that doesn't mean that you're not doing things right. Most of the time, when recovery feels hard, because uncertainty is present, that's an indicator that we're doing recovery honestly. That's an indicator that we're doing something right, that we're not running from our feelings. And so many of us come into recovery wanting things like freedom or things like peace and stability. And what we don't expect as we enter recovery is how much not knowing, how much uncertainty we're going to have to face along the way. We enter into recovery and we get hit with questions like, is my relationship ever going to heal? Are the urges going to keep coming back? How long is that going to last? Questions like, am I ever going to feel normal again? Am I doing enough? Am I doing this right? Or what if I mess this up? And when those questions hit, something happens in our bodies before our minds ever catch up with what's going on. So tonight is not about eliminating uncertainty. Uncertainty is a part of life. None of us know everything. Life is not predictable. Tonight is going to be about learning how to feel safe enough when certainty isn't available. That's what we're going to be taking a look at this evening. And so let's get started with that. I want to say something here at the beginning that's important for you to understand while we talk through this tonight. Your nervous system interprets uncertainty as danger. Not because you're weak, not because you lack faith, and not because you're not committed enough to recovery. But here's the facts. Our brain is wired for predictability. Now, some of you will argue with me on this point and will push back, but what I'm going to tell you is this. All of us, every one of us want some measure of predictability, some measure of structure. We all want that in our life. We want confidence that when this happens, this is going to take place as a result. With this congestion, I'm going to be drinking some tonight. I got my green tea, got my peppermints, and I've got my scratchy throat. So hopefully that doesn't cause too much trouble. So our brain is wired for predictability. We want to know how things are going to turn out. And for us, something that may sound kind of strange is that for many of us, most of us, in fact, addiction and compulsive behaviors gave us a form of false certainty. And here's how that worked and how that looked. In our active addiction, we knew how our addiction and how our compulsive behavior was going to make us feel. We knew when we gave in to our addiction, we knew how quickly we were going to get results. In our active addiction, we knew how to access it. We knew where to get our fix. And we used our addiction and our compulsive behavior to escape discomfort. Even if it was brief, we knew if I act out, if I do this, I'm going to escape my discomfort for a certain amount of time. Now, even when the ultimate consequences of our addiction was terrible, the predictability felt regulating to our brain. The predictability of how the addiction was going to operate gave us a sense of security and safety. Now, I know that sounds strange, but that really is what was taking place. And when we enter into recovery, recovery moves that part of the predictability. Now, in recovery, when we're not running to our behavior, when we're not running to our substance of choice, now those emotions that we were trying to escape from, those feelings, things like anxiety or loneliness or heartache, now those emotions last longer. And that's scary. Outcomes aren't guaranteed. Relationships we recognize now are fragile, and we begin to recognize just how fragile they are. And there's no quick off switch. A friend of mine that's in my Monday night in-person group, he likes to talk about the panic button on the wall. And he talks about his addiction and about his struggle. And he says, I like to have that panic button on the wall. He says, there have been times when I wanted that panic button right there next to me. But he says, I've grown comfortable. I just want that panic button somewhere in the room so that when things get out of control, when my emotions are flaring up, when I'm feeling lonely, when I'm feeling depressed, when I'm feeling scared, I want that panic button to be somewhere nearby so that I can go hit it and shut those feelings down. And that's what addiction is all about. That phrase, there's that phrase that I use. If you've listened to me, you've heard me say this before. Behind every behavior is a feeling, and behind every feeling is a need. And what we're doing, what's happening, those needs, a lot of times are needs that have been present since our childhood. They might be perceived needs, they might be real needs. They're almost always valid needs, but they're present and they didn't get met in the past. And we're still carrying them with us. And those needs generate feelings. They generate feelings like fear, anxiety, like anger, like loneliness, like sadness. They generate those feelings, and we don't know what to do with those feelings. And those feelings are causing us discomfort, and that's where the behavior comes in. We've learned that if I turn to alcohol, or if I turn to some kind of drug, if I turn to sexual behavior, if I turn to eating, any compulsion that you can name, if I turn to scrolling social media for hours on end, if I turn to these compulsive behaviors, they are going to numb out those feelings and those things that make me uncomfortable. And so when anxiety spikes, our body, it's not really saying go act out. What it's saying is something feels unsafe and I don't know how to settle it. That's what's happening. And it's important that we understand that, because the habit that we formed is turning to that addiction and that compulsive behavior. And in recovery, what we're doing is we're learning a new way to respond when my body begins to say, I'm uncomfortable, I don't feel safe. So a lot of us have been taught over a lifetime, either explicitly or implicitly, we have been taught that recovery is all about trying harder. And what that's done is that's pushed us into a lifetime of white knuckling, trying to do everything by willpower. But willpower assumes that the problem lives in my thinking brain and in my thinking process. Uncertainty doesn't exist there. Uncertainty lives in our bodies. And so that's why we can logically know that acting out isn't going to help. And we can know that with uncertainty, the things that we're feeling, the things that we're experiencing, that they are going to pass. And we know and recognize that we've been here before. We've been in situations before where uncertainty was present. You know, we can know those things logically, but we still feel overwhelmed. I've had people tell me, they said, even as I am going to get that bottle of liquor, even as I'm injecting the drugs, even as I am in the process of acting out sexually, I know that I'm not going to feel better when it's done. And again, that's because it's not a matter of logic. It's a physical body response. We don't need better arguments. We don't really need a lot more information. We don't need to be reading a lot more books. What we need is experiences of safety. We need to feel safe. So the question becomes, what actually helps our nervous system settle and calm itself when answers aren't available? And realistically, there's a lot of times in our lives when we just don't have all the answers. So, what I want to do this evening is this. I want to walk through several tools. We're going to take a look at some tools tonight, not as techniques for us to master, but as practices that build capacity over time, that build capacity for us to live with uncertainty and to be able to experience a measure of safety without having to have all the answers. Now, tool number one, body-based regulation. The first place that safety is experienced is in the body. For instance, maybe you have children, or maybe you can remember back to when you were a child. Can you remember as a child, or can you remember with your children watching your child experience fear? Are you experiencing fear? And maybe a parent, a caregiver, somebody came over and just placed an arm around you, laid a hand on your shoulder, and you experienced safety in your body. Can you relate to that? Before we begin to try to solve anything, we have to regulate. And there are a lot of things that can look like. For instance, that can look like slowing our breathing, especially longer exhales. And we're going to talk about some of these things specifically. With breathing, there's more data on the way that breathing calms our body and soothes us than any other technique that exists. I want you to think. I was in a parking lot today at my favorite coffee shop, and I was walking through the parking lot. Some of the sidewalks and some of the things are covered with snow, or there's a ridge of snow. And so I was walking in the parking lot, and I heard a horn behind me. And my body reacted immediately to that. Do you know what I'm talking about? You hear brakes lock up, or you hear a horn immediately behind you. And all of a sudden, in an instant, in a split second, before you can even begin to think about what's happening, your your shoulders tighten up, maybe your arms come up. That's a defense mechanism in case you need to protect yourself. Maybe you clench your fists, or you jump to the side. That's your body responding. And when that happens, what happens with your breathing? Does your breathing slow down? No. Your breathing gets fast and shallow because your brain has kicked into that fight, flight, or freeze mode. And so being able to slow our breathing, and when we breathe, it needs to come in the form of in through our nose, out through our mouth. And it's best if the exhale lasts a little bit longer than the inhale. But we slow our breathing. Now, why is that important, and why does that help to regulate our bodies and calm us? It's because Our brain in that fight, flight, or freeze mode is saying, breathe fast, get ready to react. But when we respond by forcing ourselves to take slow, deep breaths, what we're communicating to that brain response is things are safe. And that part of our brain that some people call it T-Rex brain or the reptilian brain, it reacts to that. It says, wait a minute, he's breathing slow. I thought we were in danger. But his actions are saying that we're not in danger. Maybe I could relax. And so we begin by regulating our body, and that can begin with slowing our breathing. We can put our feet flat on the floor. Now, why does that help? You know, I'm seated here in my desk, and when my feet are flat on the floor, that communicates to my body that I'm stable, that there's stability here. I'm not expecting to have to jump up and move quickly. There's some comfort. We can notice where and how our body is supported. We can even, and I want you to practice this sometime, maybe practice it right now while I'm talking. We can place a hand on our chest or on our stomach. And again, I want to go back to children. If you've had children, you've seen, especially with newborns, with infants, and they're laying in a bed and maybe they're taking a nap or they're just laying there content, and all of a sudden a door slams or a dog barks or there's a loud noise. And the baby reacts with that vagal nerve response, that vagus nerve response. When that baby gets scared, its body stiffens, it arches its back, its head goes back, and its arms go up. That's a natural response for every infant. It's that vagus nerve attempting to self-regulate. But when that happens, then that baby may begin to cry out. Most of the time, all it takes for self-regulation is for mom or dad or somebody in the room to walk over and speak in a calm voice and lay a hand. I can't tell you how many times. I have 4 daughters. I have grandchildren. And I'd be sitting caring for my grandchildren, caring for my daughters when they were little. And they start to fuss, they start to cry. And I can't tell you how many times just walk over and lay a hand on their body just for a few seconds. And I could feel their body relax. And they would calm. And a lot of times they'd fall back to sleep. And I want to tell you something. That will work with you as an adult. It works with me as an adult. When I'm recognizing I'm dysregulated, try laying your hand on your chest. Take those deep breaths. Lay your hand on your stomach. It gives our body a sense of presence, and it helps us to self-regulate. And you might say silently, there's a video that'll be coming out in a couple weeks on Tuesdays and Thursdays on my social media. I'll release videos that are titled, "What are you doing for your recovery today?" And I'll give you a hint on one that's coming out that's scheduled to post in a couple weeks. It's called Mirror Whispering. And the idea is that the most harsh, most critical voice that we hear every day isn't our spouse. It isn't our boss at work. It isn't a teacher at school. The most critical, the most harsh voice we hear on a daily basis is our own. And so, as we're doing these things, a breathing exercise, as we lay a hand on our chest or on our stomach, and as we're breathing, we take that breath in through our nose. And then as we breathe out, we whisper a sentence that we put together when we are regulated. And it needs to be a short, simple sentence. It can be, I'm in a safe place. It's okay to not be certain. Come up with your own sentence. And so we breathe in through our nose, and then as we breathe out, we whisper, it's okay to be uncertain. I'm in a safe place. And we whisper it because, have you ever tried to yell at somebody or get after somebody while you were whispering? We can't do it. We can't do it. And so we whisper to ourselves. We might whisper something like, I don't need answers right now. I need to feel safe. And that's combined with our breathing exercise and perhaps comforting ourselves with a hand on our chest or on our stomach. Now, doing these kind of things, this isn't avoidance. This isn't some kind of trick or some kind of hippy-dippy new age psychobabble. What this is stabilization. It brings stabilization to our bodies. And when we bring stabilization to our bodies, that produces stabilization in our head. A regulated body gives me choices in how I respond. Excuse me. A dysregulated body demands escape. There are two words I used there. A regulated body gives me choices. I have options when I'm regulated. A dysregulated body demands escape. We have to do something now. We have to react. And what we want is choices and regulation. All right, tool number 2. So tool number 1 is body-based regulation. Breathing, laying a hand on ourselves, speaking to ourselves in a calm voice. Tool number 2 is naming the experience. Uncertainty becomes more dangerous for us when it's vague and when it's unnamed. So, when we're feeling uncertain, when we're feeling dysregulated, we slow it down and we name it. We don't say something like, I'm failing, I'm a failure, or like, something's wrong with me. Now, I want to ask you a minute about self-talk. Negative self-talk is a powerful thing, but it's powerfully harmful. And I can't tell you how many times I have in my past spoken to myself negatively, or how many times I witness others. I'm around people and they do something and their immediate response is, why am I so stupid? Why do I always screw things up? Negative self-talk. But what we want to do is we want to slow down and we want to name the experience. So with those feelings of uncertainty, We name the experience and we name it accurately. We say things like, I'm feeling anxious. We speak honestly. I don't know how this is going to turn out. We can say things like, part of me wants certainty right now. What we're doing with those kind of statements is that we're naming what we're feeling. We're naming the experience honestly. And naming that experience does three things for us. Naming the experience, number one, reduces shame. I want you to think about it. If we react with that negative self-talk, man, why are you always so stupid? Compared to, I'm feeling anxious. I don't know how this is going to turn out. Those last two statements are not shame-producing statements. But that statement, why are you so stupid? Why do you always screw things up? That statement immediately produces shame. So naming reduces shame. Naming it also activates the thinking brain. I want you to think for a minute. Have you ever been in a house at night or walking across a parking lot to the car at night in the dark, and you hear something and you don't have any idea what it is? You're in the house and you hear something in the other room, or you're walking across the parking lot in the dark and you hear something out there in the parking lot and you don't know what it is. Our brain involuntarily begins to activate that fight, flight, or freeze mode. But when we hear something and we're able to name it, I'm here in my bedroom here in the house. On the other side of one of the walls is the laundry room. And I share the house with a friend. And I may be here in the room at night, maybe with the lights out, going to sleep. And I hear something and I don't know what it is. And it produces some anxiety. But then all of a sudden, I say to myself, oh, I bet that's Richard just putting some laundry in the dryer. And I name what I've heard, and that anxiety drops. And it drops because I've activated my thinking brain. I'm walking across that parking lot in the dark and I hear something. And I respond with mild panic, with fear, fight, flight, and freeze. And then I think to myself, it was probably just a cat. That's probably all that it was. And I've activated my thinking brain and I begin to experience some peace. So naming it activates my thinking brain. And then the third thing is that it interrupts automatic coping. Now, what do I mean by that? When those unhealthy feelings and reactions are present, things like shame, things like anxiety and fear, fight, flight, and freeze. Man, sorry. When that's happening, I am responding, my body is responding automatically in ways to cope with that. But as I begin to name it and as I activate my thinking brain, I'm able to move from a reaction to a response. I'm not just automatically responding, looking, searching for a way to cope and to relieve the feelings, the anxiety, the fear. What I'm doing is I'm enabling myself to put rational actions and thoughts into play. And so a powerful sentence that we can state to ourselves in times like that might be a sentence like, I'm uncomfortable, but I don't have to fix that immediately. When we allow ourselves to get activated, when we allow ourselves to be dysregulated, what we experience is, I'm uncomfortable and I have to do something now. But as we're able to self-regulate in a healthy way, we're able to accept, I'm uncomfortable, but I don't have to fix that immediately. And then tool number 3 is we begin to shrink the time frame. Here's what I mean by that. Uncertainty overwhelms us because we project things too far into the future. And we begin to ask questions that our nervous system can't answer. We ask questions like, is my marriage going to survive? Is my relationship going to survive? What if I relapse again next week or next month? Is life ever going to be normal? What we're doing with questions like that is we're projecting everything into the distant future. And I'm going to tell you something. Nobody on the face of the planet has control over the future. Instead, recovery teaches us to shrink the time frame. And here's what that looks like. We ask ourselves questions like, what's the next right step? We don't ask, what's the step next month? What's the next right step now? What do I need in the next 5 minutes? Not what do I need tomorrow or what do I need next month? What do I need in the next 5 minutes? If I focus on next week or next month, if I focus on tomorrow, I become overwhelmed because I don't know all the variables that are going to be present. But if I focus on what do I need in the next 5 minutes, I'm able to bring a lot more control into that time frame. We ask ourselves questions like, who can I stay connected to today? Just an hour and a half ago, again, going back to my Monday evening in-person group, we have a text thread that we use. I think there's about 18 of us now in that text thread. And I got to be honest with you, there are times when that text thread gets a little out of control and somebody throws a dad joke into that text thread, and the next thing you know, there are 50 texts throwing out new dad jokes and responses. And there are times like that when I just need to take a break and ignore some of them. But about an hour and a half ago. In that text thread, one of the members of my Monday night in-person group shot a text out. Is anybody available to talk? I'm feeling dysregulated. And in a matter of minutes, I think about 4 people responded. Now, I'll be honest with you, a couple responded and said, I'm in the middle of something right now and I can't call, but I'm thinking about you and you've got this, man. You can handle this. A couple reached out like that. But a couple reached out, one in particular reached out and said, call me right now. Pick up your phone and call me. I can talk. And that phone call was made. Connection was maintained. And he was able to respond to the stimulation in a healthy way. So the key there is that we don't need the whole map for our future. We need the map for the next step. That's all we need to be able to see and to move into the next step. And then tool number 4, related to something that I just brought up there. Excuse me. Tool number 4 is the idea of connection over control. Now, what am I saying there? Certainty isolates. I would argue that many times certainty can feel safe, but certainty usually is not a good thing. Because when we experience certainty, we become convinced that we can handle things on our own. And when we feel certain, we have a tendency to step into isolation. Safety, on the other hand, comes through connection. Now, addiction has taught us a lot of things. Addiction has taught us things like, you need just to take care of this alone. Recovery, on the other hand, says, let yourself be seen and let yourself be known. And so what does that look like? That might mean, like what I just talked about, that took place about an hour and a half ago with my in-person group that I attend. It might mean texting somebody instead of sitting at home alone and spiraling out of control. It might look like saying, I'm not okay. I'm not comfortable. I don't have a solution. And reaching out to discuss that with somebody. It might mean sitting with somebody who doesn't try to fix you, but just provide you with presence. Again, back to that idea of that baby who gets startled and all that it needs is for somebody to lay a hand on its body. It just needs to know that it's not alone. You know, I've shared a story in the past, and I'll share it again because I think it's worth repeating. When my third daughter had her third child, I moved into her basement. I moved into the basement of my daughter and my son-in-law. when she was about to have her third child. And it honestly, it helped me at a time, but it allowed me to help them with the two older kids. And as the baby was born, and to help keep the older kids occupied, and to help to give my daughter and my son-in-law a break, especially in the evenings. And people used to talk about comments used to be made about my grandson, their oldest child. And occasionally a comment would be made that he was afraid of the dark, because what would happen sometimes, I was living out there, and my daughter and my son-in-law had a gym set up out in the garage. And my daughter and son-in-law would go out there to the gym to work out together in the evening. And I would come upstairs into the living room, and I would sit and read in the living room. My grandkids' room was off to the side, because my grandson had a tendency, he would fall asleep, but after a while, he would wake up. And when he would wake up, he'd call out. He'd call out for Daddy. And if Daddy didn't respond, he'd call out for Mommy. And if she didn't respond, he'd begin to have a little bit of a meltdown. And some people used to comment about him being afraid of the dark. They would say things like, you need to put a nightlight in there. He'll be fine, just put a nightlight in there. But I'm going to tell you something. He wasn't afraid of the dark. They lived at the time out this little town, the edge of a little town called Martinsburg, out in the country. It was really nice when you went outside. You didn't hear traffic. You didn't hear neighbors. Out there, when you went outside, you heard cows. And behind their house, they had a field. And on the back side of that field was woods. And here's why I know he wasn't afraid of the dark. In the evenings, sometimes I'd go out at night, and I'd take my grandson and my granddaughter, and they were both young, very young. And we'd go out after dark in the dark. And they would hold my hand, one on each side. They'd hold my hand, and we would walk across that field behind the house in the dark. And as we would walk across that field, we would howl at the coyotes. Now, I know that sounds kind of goofy, but if you grew up in the country, man, that's a good time, because you know what happens? The coyotes begin to talk back to you. You howl at the coyotes, and the coyotes begin to howl back at you. And as we would approach that tree line, those coyotes would come down towards that tree line. They wouldn't come out into the field, but they'd come down into the edge of the trees, and we'd go up towards the edge of the trees in the dark, holding hands, and we'd howl at the coyotes, and they'd howl back. And my grandson and my granddaughter thought that was the coolest thing, because we were talking to the coyotes. Now, I'm going to tell you, a lot of you, I'd say some of you, would be scared in a situation like that. In the dark, out in the country, howling at coyotes. My grandson and my granddaughter, were laughing and having a great time. They weren't afraid. Do you know why they weren't afraid? Because they weren't alone. They were holding Papa's hand. And as long as they had hold of my hand, they had a sense of safety. And that's what we're talking about tonight. Safety. Safety in uncertainty. And they would laugh. Oh, they would laugh. And they'd howl and talk to the coyotes. And then we'd go back into the house. Now, if they walk out across that field in the dark without a flashlight and howl at the coyotes, I can tell you 100% for certain he was not afraid of the dark. What he was afraid of is what every single one of us is afraid of, and that's being alone. And when we are dysregulated, sometimes we just need to sit with somebody. We might not even need to talk. We just need presence. We need to know that we're not alone. And here's the thing with uncertainty. Connection doesn't remove uncertainty. But connection does make uncertainty survivable. And then one last tool. We need self-compassion. Harshness increases anxiety. Kindness increases capacity. When uncertainty hits, you need to notice how you speak to yourself. I talked about this earlier. Many of us default to a tone of voice and statements like, I should be further along than this. Why am I still struggling? What's wrong with me? And when we make those statements, we don't say those things to ourselves in a kind way. Recovery invites a different voice. Recovery invites us to say, this makes sense. Uncertainty in this circumstance is a normal thing. It invites us to make statements like, this is hard, but I'm learning. Or maybe we make a statement like, I'm allowed to go slow. Safety grows when we stop treating discomfort as failure. Now, for those of you that come from a faith background, maybe you've grown up in church or you're active in church now, this part's going to matter. Faith is often misunderstood as certainty, but faith isn't about answers. Faith is about presence. That idea again. Faith doesn't mean we have all the answers. Faith in God means we don't have all the answers, but we have somebody bigger than us present with us. Scripture is full of stories where people say things like, I don't know how this is going to turn out. How long, Lord? Or, I'm afraid, but I'm still here. Recovery has taught me that faith isn't trusting outcomes. It isn't trusting that everything is going to work out right. Faith is about trusting connection. It's about the idea that I'm never alone. God doesn't remove uncertainty from our lives. He meets us inside that uncertainty, and he stands with us, and he holds our hands. Now, I have a closing reflection for us tonight. This is what I want to leave you with. Uncertainty isn't a sign that something is wrong. Avoidance is. Recovery doesn't eliminate not knowing. Recovery builds the capacity to stay present anyway. So here's a question to sit with this week. Where am I demanding certainty instead of building safety. We don't need all the answers. What we need is to know that we're not alone. If something that I've talked about tonight has resonated with you, I'm going to ask you to let me know in the comments. Stick something in the comments and let me know what stood out. Whether you've been watching here on the live tonight or whether you're watching on the replay. If you're struggling, reach out. Again, you're not in this alone. You're not meant to go through this by yourself. Recovery isn't about controlling life or controlling everything in life. It's about learning how to live honestly in life. Next Tuesday, I'll be back at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And next week, we are going to talk about the 4 stages of competence in recovery. We're going to talk about that. Why feeling bad at recovery might mean that we're learning. That'll be our topic next week. If you've got something from this talk, be back next week. And then feel free to invite a friend. Oh, man. You know, the older I get, the more my stomach acts up. That's what's happened, part of what's happened tonight. If something that's been said has stood out to you, invite somebody to come back with you next week, or invite somebody to watch this week. It'll be posted on Facebook for a month. I think a month. But it'll be up on my YouTube page by tomorrow morning. And so, thank you for being here tonight. I hope something has been shared that's been beneficial. And I'll be back, talk with you again next week. Have a good evening.